My name is Michael Callahan. For 15 years, I built a life in Sacramento, California with the woman I thought was my soulmate, Elaine. We met during our sophomore year at UC Davis, both studying business administration with dreams of making our mark on the corporate world. I still remember the first time I saw her in our financial accounting class. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes focused intently on her notes, asking the sharpest questions that impressed even our notoriously difficult professor that I wasn't the type to approach beautiful women easily. My father had raised me after my mother's early death to be thoughtful and deliberate, qualities that made me successful academically, but less so socially. Yet something about Elaine gave me courage. After class one day, I mentioned a calculation error in one of her questions, not to embarrass her, but genuinely hoping to help. Instead of being defensive, she laughed, thanked me, and suggested we study together. That was Elaine, confident enough to accept correction, pragmatic enough to see an opportunity in a potential ally. Our relationship evolved naturally from study partners to friends to something more. By senior year, we were inseparable. She had this way of drawing me out of my shell, encouraging me to join business competitions, network at campus events, and even occasionally abandon the books for weekend road trips to Lake Tahoe or the California coast. I fell for her ambition, her sharp mind, and how she seemed to see potential in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. After graduation, her with honors, me not far behind, we both landed entry-level positions in Sacramento. The city was a deliberate choice, more affordable than San Francisco, but with enough opportunities to grow, close enough to our alma mater to maintain connections, but far enough to feel like a fresh start. We rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment downtown, furnishing it with secondhand finds and ambitious plans. While Elaine started as a marketing coordinator at Wilson & Marks, a mid-sized agency with prestigious clients, I took a more unconventional path. Having interned at a consulting firm during college, I developed a passion for solving business problems directly. With encouragement from a former professor who became my mentor, I started my own small consulting practice focusing on operational efficiency for family-owned businesses. The first 3 years were lean. Elaine's steady paycheck kept us afloat while I built my client base one referral at a time. I worked from our apartment's corner desk, then from a shared workspace, taking every meeting I could get, sometimes for fees that barely covered my gas. But gradually, my reputation for thorough analysis and practical solutions grew. By our 5th year in Sacramento, my consulting firm, Callahan Business Solutions, had 4 employees and offices overlooking Capitol Park. Meanwhile, Elaine climbed the corporate ladder with impressive speed. From coordinator to specialist to manager, then to director by her 8th year. She had a natural talent for understanding consumer psychology and translating it into marketing strategies that resonated. Her campaigns won industry awards, bringing both recognition to her agency and more responsibility to her plate. I admired how she could command a boardroom, presenting complex ideas with clarity and persuasion that made clients eager to follow her vision. By our 10th anniversary, we had achieved the life we'd planned in those late-night conversations in college. We purchased a beautiful craftsman-style home in East Sacramento for bedrooms, though we used the extra spaces for a home office and guest room rather than children's quarters. The topic of kids had come up occasionally over the years, but between Elaine's career ambitions and my growing business, we always decided not yet, until eventually it became an unspoken not ever. We had each other, and that seemed enough. Our social life blossomed along with our careers. Elaine was a natural connector, forming friendships with colleagues, clients, and neighbors with effortless charm. I was more reserved, but developed close relationships with several business associates who became personal friends. We hosted dinner parties where conversations flowed from business strategy to art exhibitions to travel plans. We joined the Sacramento Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, attended charity galas, and became members of a local wine club. From the outside, we were the quintessential power couple. Caroline and David Maxwell became our closest friends. She, a professor at Sacramento State, he a civil engineer for the city. They lived 3 houses down from us, and what began as neighborly waves evolved into weekly dinners alternating between our homes. Caroline shared Elaine's love for contemporary literature and art, while David and I bonded over our mutual interest in restoration projects. They were the kind of friends who had spare keys to our house and with whom we spent holidays when not visiting our respective families. My parents, both retired teachers living in Oregon, adored Elaine and often commented on how she'd brought me out of my shell. Her family was more complicated. A critical mother in Ohio who never seemed satisfied with Elaine's achievements, and a father who had relocated to Florida with his second wife after her parents divorced during her college years. These family dynamics perhaps explained Elaine's drive for professional recognition and her occasional insecurity despite her success. Her colleague Thomas Jenkins entered our lives 3 years ago when he joined her company as the new creative director. I remember Elaine coming home excited after his first week, describing how he'd transformed a struggling campaign for a major client with a single brainstorming session. "He's brilliant," she'd said, "and exactly what the agency needed." From her descriptions, I formed a mental image of Thomas before I met him. Tall, charismatic, with the kind of effortless creative genius that commanded attention. Recently divorced after a 10-year marriage to a corporate attorney in San Francisco, he'd relocated to Sacramento for the change of pace, according to office gossip Elaine shared. When I finally met him at the agency's holiday party that December, reality matched my imagination. Thomas Jenkins carried himself with confidence that bordered on arrogance, but was softened by a self-deprecating sense of humor. He was conventionally handsome, salt and pepper hair despite being only in his early 40s, athletic build maintained by regular tennis matches, designer clothes that looked casually thrown together but clearly weren't. He shook my hand firmly, maintained eye contact, and asked thoughtful questions about my consulting work that indicated he'd either done his research or paid attention to what Elaine had shared about me. "Your wife is the brightest mind in the agency," he told me, champagne glass in hand, as Elaine chatted with colleagues across the room. "We're lucky to have her." I nodded, pleased by the professional respect. "She speaks highly of you too. Says you've revolutionized the creative department." He laughed, a rich sound that turned heads nearby. "Kind of her to say, but I just removed some unnecessary barriers. Talented people like Elaine just need space to shine." He glanced at his watch, an understated but clearly expensive timepiece. "I should circulate. Good meeting you finally, Michael. We should all get dinner sometime." That dinner invitation materialized a month later, then again the following month. Thomas became a semi-regular presence in our social conversations. Elaine would mention projects they were collaborating on, challenges with difficult clients they were tackling together, agency politics they navigated as allies. I thought nothing of it. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never had reason to doubt Elaine's fidelity, and I wasn't the jealous type. Thomas was just another colleague, or so I thought. It started with small changes almost imperceptible in isolation, but troubling in their accumulation. Late nights at the office became more frequent around the 18-month mark after Thomas joined the agency. The first few times, Elaine called to let me know she'd be late. "Big client," she'd say, voice apologetic but also energized. "The Westfall presentation is tomorrow, and we're reworking the entire campaign approach." Or, "The Phoenix Group is wavering on their commitment, and Thomas thinks if we develop 3 alternate concepts tonight, we can save the account." I believed her without question. Her career had always been important to both of us. I'd sometimes bring dinner to her office on these late nights during our early years together. But when I offered now, she quickly declined. "Not necessary," she'd say. "The agency ordered food, or Thomas suggested this new Thai place for delivery." I accepted these explanations, focusing instead on my own growing client roster. The frequency increased from once a month to once a week, then twice. She'd arrive home after I'd gone to bed, slipping in quietly around midnight or sometimes later. I'd feel the mattress dip, smell wine, or sometimes scotch on her breath as she kissed my cheek, assuming I was asleep. In the mornings, she'd be up before me, already showered and dressed for the day, applying makeup at her vanity while checking early emails. Then came the physical changes, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. New clothes appeared in her closet, more fashion-forward than her usual professional attire. "Just updating my look," she explained when I commented on a particularly bold dress. "The agency works with luxury brands now, and Thomas says presentation matters." The mention of his name came naturally, without hesitation. The expensive perfume arrived next, a complex, sophisticated scent replacing the light floral fragrance she'd worn since our early dating days. When I asked about it, she mentioned it was a gift from the agency to the executive team after landing a major cosmetics client. A reasonable explanation that I accepted without question, her sudden interest in fitness after years of claiming she didn't have time for the gym was harder to rationalize. Twice weekly yoga sessions became daily workouts, sometimes extending to weekend mornings. She purchased high-end athletic wear, invested in a personal trainer, and began tracking her meals with a nutritionist's precision. The agency health insurance added wellness benefits, she explained. Thomas got us all into this group challenge thing. The team that logs the most fitness hours gets extra vacation days. I should have recognized these classic signs, but I was distracted by my own professional demands. Callahan Business Solutions had expanded to 10 employees, and we'd taken on our first international clients, Canadian manufacturers looking to optimize their entry into U.S. markets. My days were filled with strategic planning sessions, employee management challenges, and constant travel between Sacramento, Vancouver, and Toronto. When home, I was often mentally elsewhere, preparing for presentations or troubleshooting client crises. The changes in Elaine's digital habits were what should have triggered immediate alarm. Her phone, once casually left on countertops or coffee tables, was suddenly always in her possession or deliberately placed face down. She added a fingerprint lock, claiming concerns about agency information security. Texts would arrive, causing her to smile at her screen before quickly typing responses and putting the phone away if I entered the room. She began taking calls in another room or stepping outside onto our back patio, voice lowered. Once, returning early from a business trip a day before expected, I overheard her laughing in our home office. That particular laugh she reserved for clever observations or inside jokes. I heard her say, "You're terrible," in a tone of affectionate admonishment I recognized from our own early relationship. When I knocked on the half-closed door, she quickly ended the call, explaining it was just Caroline planning a surprise for David's upcoming birthday. I almost called Caroline later that day to offer help with the party, but stopped myself. Some instinct, or perhaps avoidance of a truth I wasn't ready to face, kept me from potentially uncovering a lie. Instead, I immersed myself in client reports, pushing away the discomfort gnawing at my consciousness. Our intimacy, never the all-consuming passion of romance novels, but always satisfying and affectionate, had diminished gradually. Elaine began going to bed later than me, citing work emails or presentation preparations. When we did make love, something felt performative about her engagement, as if she were going through expected motions rather than being genuinely present. I attributed this to mutual work stress and the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. The weekend getaways we'd periodically enjoyed to Napa Valley or the Mendocino coast became increasingly difficult to schedule due to Elaine's critical project phases that seemingly always fell on our planned dates. Business travel that had once been coordinated to minimize our time apart now frequently overlapped, leaving our beautiful home empty while we both stayed in hotel rooms in different cities. What really triggered my suspicions beyond denial was a chance encounter at a small Sacramento art museum fundraiser I attended alone, as Elaine had a mandatory agency strategy retreat that weekend. I was examining a contemporary sculpture when Caroline Maxwell approached, surprise evident in her expression. "Michael, I didn't expect to see you here. Is Elaine around?" "She's at a work retreat this weekend," I explained, embracing my friend. "Up in Tahoe, I think." Something flickered across Caroline's face. Discomfort, hesitation, concern. She smiled too quickly. "Oh, right. She mentioned that." We chatted about the exhibition, about David's recent promotion, about my latest business challenges. As we parted, she squeezed my arm with unusual intensity. "You know you can always talk to us, right? About anything." That interaction might have passed without deeper consideration had I not received a text from another acquaintance the following morning. Lisa Bradford, a former client whose company's holiday party we'd attended annually. "Saw Elaine at Mulvaney's last night. Didn't get a chance to say hello, but she looked great. Tell her the red dress was stunning." Mulvaney's was a high-end restaurant in Sacramento, definitely not in Tahoe. The message was innocent enough, Lisa assuming I knew my wife's whereabouts. but it confirmed the suspicion Caroline's expression had planted. Either Elaine had returned early from the retreat without telling me, or there had been no retreat at all. I replied to Lisa with casual thanks, then spent hours contemplating my next move. Direct confrontation seemed premature without definitive evidence. Checking Elaine's phone or email felt like a violation of trust one wasn't yet ready to commit. Instead, I decided to pay more attention, to be more present in our relationship, wondering if perhaps I'd been too consumed with work and had created this distance between us. For 2 weeks, I made concerted efforts, leaving work earlier, suggesting date nights, asking thoughtful questions about her day. Elaine seemed alternately touched and uncomfortable with this attention, sometimes engaging warmly and other times creating subtle distance with vague work complaints or sudden headaches. Then came the definitive moment that transformed suspicion into certainty. Caroline called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice strained. "Can we meet for coffee?" "Just us." We met at a small cafe far from our usual haunts. Caroline fidgeted with her napkin, avoiding eye contact until finally sighing deeply. "I've been struggling with whether to tell you this," she began, voice low. "David thinks I should stay out of it, that it's not our business." "Tell me what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Last Friday, I had dinner with my department colleagues at Ella Dining Room. I saw Elaine there." Caroline swallowed hard. She was with a man. They were in a corner booth, holding hands across the table. The way they were looking at each other. She trailed off, then added unnecessarily, "It wasn't professional, Michael." "Thomas Jenkins?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Caroline nodded, relief and sadness mingling in her expression. "I'm so sorry. I thought maybe you knew, that perhaps you had an arrangement. But the way you talked about her being in Tahoe," I thanked Caroline for her honesty, assuring her I wasn't angry with her. As we parted, she hugged me tightly, whispering, "Whatever you decide to do, we're here for you." Driving home, a strange calm settled over me. The uncertainty had been worse than the truth. Now that I knew, or at least had strong evidence, I could determine my response rather than floundering in suspicion. The betrayal hurt, certainly, but the lies hurt more. 15 years of trust, compromised. 15 years of partnership, undermined. When Elaine came home that night, earlier than usual, I searched her face for signs: guilt, distance, distraction. She smiled, kissed my cheek, asked about my day with what seemed like genuine interest. How long had she been performing this role? How long had I been audience rather than partner to my own wife? "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing my prolonged silence. "Just tired," I replied, the first deliberate lie in what would become a strategic campaign. "Big client presentation tomorrow." She nodded sympathetically, launching into a story about her agency's newest client challenges. I watched her animated expressions, her confident gestures, wondering how I could have missed the performance aspects of our recent interactions. As she spoke, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at it, a fleeting micro-expression of pleasure crossing her features before she turned it face down without responding. "Not important?" I asked casually. "Just work," she replied smoothly. "Nothing that can't wait until morning." In that moment, I knew with certainty what my next steps would be. I needed evidence, not for confrontation, but for protection. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before deciding how to proceed. The business strategist in me recognized this as a situation requiring thorough analysis before action when Elaine mentioned an upcoming overnight trip to Los Angeles. For client meetings, I saw my opportunity. "That's perfect timing," I said. "I've been meaning to have drinks with Jason from the chamber. I can finally accept his invitation without feeling guilty about leaving you alone for the evening." She smiled, perhaps relieved at my apparent obliviousness. "You should definitely do that. You work too hard. You deserve some social time." As soon as her flight departed 2 days later, I made a call, not to Jason, but to Alexander Reeves, a private investigator recommended by a client who discovered his business partner was embezzling company funds. Discreet, thorough, and ethical, my client had said. He won't judge, but he won't sugarcoat either. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I needed to know the full extent of what I was facing. The uncertainty was corrosive, eating away at my concentration during client meetings and keeping me awake at night reconstructing conversations and interactions from the past year, searching for clues I'd missed. Alexander Reeves operated from a nondescript office building in downtown Sacramento. His appearance matched his surroundings, unremarkable at first glance, but revealing careful attention to detail upon closer inspection. Mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair cut precisely, he wore a gray suit that wasn't expensive but was impeccably tailored. Nothing about him would draw attention in a crowd, which I supposed was an asset in his profession. "I don't take every case," he told me after I'd explained my situation, his voice neither judgmental nor particularly sympathetic. Vengeful spouses looking to build divorce cases, parents trying to control adult children, employers crossing ethical lines with employees, not interested. But someone needing clarity and documentation before making life-altering decisions? That I understand. His rates were substantial, but not unreasonable. He required a retainer and presented clear boundaries about his methods. "I don't break laws," he explained. "No hacking emails, no illegal surveillance, no trespassing. But public spaces are fair game, and digital forensics can reveal a lot without crossing legal lines." I signed his contract with a strange sense of surreality. This was not where I had expected my 15-year marriage to lead me. Sitting in a private investigator's office, authorizing surveillance on my wife. But I needed facts, not suspicions or hearsay, before deciding how to proceed. 2 weeks, Reeves suggested. That's usually sufficient to establish patterns and gather documentation. I'll provide weekly updates unless something urgent arises. Those 2 weeks were an exercise in compartmentalization. During the day, I focused on client needs with deliberate intensity, finding that work provided temporary escape from my personal turmoil. At home, I maintained normalcy with Elaine, discussing renovation plans for our master bathroom, debating summer vacation options, watching our favorite shows together. I became an actor in my own life, performing the role of unsuspecting husband, while internally gathering my resources for whatever revelation awaited. The first update from Reeves came via secure email, containing photographs of Elaine and Thomas leaving her office building together, driving in his car to a restaurant 30 miles outside Sacramento, sharing what appeared to be an intimate dinner based on their body language and the wine bottle on their table. Nothing definitively damning, but certainly supporting my suspicions. Common pattern with workplace affairs, Reeves noted in his commentary. Destinations far enough from familiar territory to minimize chance encounters with acquaintances, but not so far as to require elaborate explanations for absence. The second update arrived sooner than scheduled, with Reeves requesting an in-person meeting. In his office, he slid a folder across his desk, his expression professionally neutral. "I believe this provides the clarity you were seeking," he said. Simply, the folder contained photographs documenting a clear pattern of deception. Elaine and Thomas entering the same hotel room at a boutique establishment in Napa Valley during her supposed girls' weekend with former college friends. Timestamped. Images of long lunches at secluded restaurants, their hands intertwined across tables, expressions unguarded. Receipts for jewelry purchases made by Thomas that matched new pieces Elaine had claimed were vintage finds from that antique shop Caroline recommended. Most damning were the text message records that Reeves had legally obtained. 8 months. They'd been carrying on their affair, precisely coinciding with the changes I'd noticed in Elaine's behavior. The messages revealed not just physical betrayal, but emotional abandonment. They planned weekend getaways while I traveled for business. They exchanged intimate photos. They discussed their future together. The worst part wasn't the affair itself, but the messages where they laughed about me. How I was clueless, focused on my precious clients, while Thomas gave her what she really needed. How Thomas was twice the man I'd ever be. How they were planning a future with my money. He'd give me a generous settlement, Elaine had written. He always avoids conflict. It's actually his biggest weakness. He'll pay anything to maintain his dignity and reputation. Reading those words, clinical assessments of my character, plans to exploit what they perceived as weaknesses, transformed my hurt into something colder and more focused. This wasn't just passion or midlife crisis or temporary insanity. This was calculated betrayal from the person who knew me most intimately. "There's more," Reeves said, handing me a second, thinner folder. "Financial documentation you should be aware of." This folder contained evidence that Elaine had opened a separate bank account 3 months earlier, gradually transferring small amounts from our joint savings that would have escaped my notice had I not been looking specifically. The account showed regular deposits from Thomas as well, investments in our future. According to their messages, more troubling were indications that company resources were being redirected. Thomas had apparently been developing a side business, a boutique creative agency, while still employed as creative director. Emails showed Elaine helping him approach current clients about potentially following them when they eventually left. They'd used agency software, photography equipment, and even administrative support for developing their business plan and initial marketing materials. This crosses from personal infidelity into potential professional misconduct, Reeves noted. Depending on their employment contracts, this could constitute breach of fiduciary duty or violation of non-compete clauses. I sat silently, absorbing the comprehensive nature of the betrayal. Not just our marriage vows, but professional ethics and financial trust, all compromised. What do most people do at this point? I asked finally. Reeves considered before answering. Reactions vary. Some confront immediately, often regrettably, without strategic planning. Others file for divorce without confrontation. Some seek marriage counseling. He paused. The most successful resolutions, regardless of whether the relationship continues, come from those who take time to process before acting. I nodded, thanked him for his thoroughness, and paid his final invoice with a generous bonus. The evidence was conclusive, far beyond what I had anticipated or hoped to find. Now I needed to determine my response. I drove to the American River Parkway, a nature preserve where Elaine and I had often walked during happier times. For hours, I sat watching the water flow, methodically examining my options. Direct confrontation would provide emotional catharsis but strategic disadvantage. Immediate divorce filing would signal my awareness but minimize my ability to prepare adequately. Pretending ignorance while secretly consulting legal counsel seemed the most prudent approach. That evening, Elaine called to say she'd be working late again. I agreed without protest, suggesting she not worry about waking me. As soon as we disconnected, I made 2 appointments, one with a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma and another with Catherine Winters, reportedly the most formidable divorce attorney in Northern California. The following week was an exercise in disciplined deception. I met with Catherine Winters in her downtown office, bringing copies of all documentation from the private investigator. Winters, a precisely groomed woman in her 60s with a reputation for both ethical practice and relentless effectiveness, reviewed the materials with methodical attention. California is a no-fault divorce state, she explained, which means infidelity itself doesn't impact property division or support determinations. However, she continued, tapping the financial documentation, financial misconduct and misappropriation of marital assets can significantly influence outcomes. She outlined potential strategies, emphasizing the importance of timing and documentation. Don't confront her until we've secured your financial position, she advised. Emotional satisfaction now could cost you substantially later. Under her guidance, I began methodically documenting our assets, gathering financial records, and quietly securing copies of important documents. I consulted with my business attorney to ensure my company was protected from potential claims. I met with my accountant to understand tax implications of various settlement scenarios. Meanwhile, I continued therapy sessions, processing my anger and betrayal in that confidential space rather than bringing it home. My therapist, Dr. Amelia Chun, provided crucial perspective. You're entering a business negotiation that happens to involve your heart, she observed. Compartmentalization is serving you well right now, but eventually you'll need to address the emotional impact. This methodical approach protects your assets, but healing requires acknowledging the wound. After 3 weeks of preparation, I felt ready for confrontation. I selected an evening when Elaine had actually come home at a reasonable hour, appearing relaxed and almost affectionate. She'd brought takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and suggested we eat on the patio. As we finished dinner, she reached across the table to touch my hand, an intimate gesture that once would have pleased me but now felt hollow. "This is nice," she said, smiling. "We should make more time for evenings like this." I met her gaze steadily. "Where were you really last weekend, Elaine?" Her expression flickered briefly before settling into concerned confusion. "What do you mean?" "I told you, The agency retreat in Monterey. Interesting, I responded, my voice calm. Because I have photographs of you and Thomas checking into La Belle Étoile in Napa on Friday evening. Room 312. You wore that blue dress I gave you. For your birthday. The color drained from her face, and her hand withdrew from mine. For several seconds, she said nothing, visibly calculating her response. Michael, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I interrupted quietly. You've been explaining fictional, late nights and non-existent work commitments for 8 months now. You're quite skilled at explanation. She attempted denial, then anger at my spying, then tears and remorse when she realized the extent of my knowledge. She swore she'd end it with Thomas, blamed work pressure and my frequent business trips for creating distance between us, claimed the affair had been a terrible mistake rather than the calculated campaign our messages revealed. It just happened, she insisted, tears streaming down her face. I never meant to hurt you. Planning to leave me after accessing my retirement funds doesn't just happen, I responded, quoting her messages verbatim. Discussing how to maximize your settlement doesn't just happen. Mocking me with your lover doesn't just happen. Her expression transformed then. The remorseful wife persona dropping away to reveal calculation and defensiveness. What exactly do you want, Michael? To punish me? To humiliate me? Or can we try to save what we've built together? I'm considering my options, I replied, a deliberately ambiguous response. I suggest you do the same. Over the next several days, Elaine launched a campaign of reconciliation. Tearful apologies, promises of transparency, suggestions of marriage counseling, even initiating physical intimacy that I gently deflected. I responded with noncommittal consideration, suggesting we take time to reflect before making decisions. I'll sleep in the guest room while we figure things out, I offered, presenting it as respect for her space rather than my inability to share a bed with someone I know longer trusted. She immediately protested that this wasn't necessary, that physical distance would only make healing harder. Her insistence on maintaining our previous sleeping arrangement despite her ongoing affair. Thomas had texted twice during our confrontation dinner, cemented my decision about our future. I need time, I stated firmly. If you're serious about rebuilding trust, you'll respect that. Reluctantly, she agreed, clearly believing this temporary arrangement would evolve into forgiveness and reconciliation. I allowed her to maintain this belief, using the time to finalize my preparations with Catherine Winters. 3 days after our confrontation, Elaine informed me she'd ended things with Thomas, showing me a text message exchange as proof. What she didn't know was that Reeves had maintained surveillance at my request. Photographs taken that same afternoon showed them meeting in a park across town, embracing in a manner that certainly didn't suggest termination of their relationship. I said nothing, merely nodding at her declaration while continuing my strategic planning. I pretended to consider her suggestion of seeing a marriage counselor, even researching options and discussing potential candidates, which she interpreted as encouraging signs. We can get through this, she assured me one evening, reaching for my hand across the kitchen island. Many couples emerge stronger after infidelity. We have 15 years of history. That's worth fighting for. I smiled non-committally, wondering if she actually believed these platitudes or if this was merely performance while she developed her own exit strategy. Either way, I continued playing my role in our newly dysfunctional dynamic, the wounded, but potentially forgiving husband considering reconciliation. I consulted with Catherine Winters bi-weekly, developing a comprehensive strategy that balanced legal protection with ethical boundaries. She was bluntly clear about California's divorce laws. No fault means exactly that, she explained during one of our meetings. The court doesn't care who cheated or lied. Assets acquired during marriage are community property regardless of whose name is on the accounts. The standard approach is 50-50 division with spousal support calculated based on income disparity and length of marriage. I frowned at this seemingly unjust equation. So there's no consequence for betrayal? For planning to exploit our marriage for financial gain? She smiled thinly. I didn't say that. I said infidelity itself doesn't matter to the court. Financial misconduct, however, is a different matter entirely. If we can prove Elaine diverted marital assets for non-marital purposes or engaged in activities contrary to fiduciary duty, we can potentially secure a disproportionate division. Under her guidance, I documented every suspicious financial transaction, noting patterns of withdrawals and credit card charges that coincided with Elaine's work trips that were actually rendezvous with Thomas. I compiled evidence of joint funds used for hotel stays, gifts, and expenses related to their affair. Most significantly, I gathered documentation of how company resources had been used to develop Thomas's side business with Elaine's assistance. This crosses from personal betrayal into professional misconduct, Catherine noted, reviewing the evidence. Their use of company resources and client relationships for personal gain could constitute breach of contract, misappropriation of proprietary information, perhaps even fraud. What are you suggesting? I asked. She considered carefully. Nothing illegal or unethical. Simply that their professional misconduct could have consequences beyond your marriage. Consequences that might influence Elaine's financial position during divorce proceedings. I understood her implication. If Elaine lost her job due to ethical violations, her claim for substantial spousal support would be weakened, particularly if the unemployment resulted from her own misconduct rather than market conditions or company. Downsizing. I've seen cases where judges take a dim view of supporting spouses who created their own financial hardship through misconduct, Catherine added, especially when the misconduct involved planning to leave the marriage using ill-gotten gains. Alongside these legal preparations, I quietly moved half our liquid assets to secure accounts, all legally done and documented as temporary protective measures rather than attempted concealment. I consulted with my financial advisor about retirement, account protections, and tax implications of various division scenarios. I met with a real estate appraiser to determine our home's current market value for potential buyout calculations. Throughout this process, I maintained the appearance of considering reconciliation. Elaine and I attended 2 sessions with a marriage counselor, performative exercises where she expressed remorse and desire to rebuild trust while I nodded thoughtfully and spoke of processing my emotions and uncertain whether trust could be restored. The counselor, detecting my ambivalence, suggested individual sessions alongside our joint meetings, which provided perfect cover for my continued appointments with Dr. Chun. In our private therapy sessions, Dr. Chun helped me navigate the complex emotional landscape of betrayal while maintaining functional compartmentalization. You're handling this with remarkable composure, she observed during one session. Almost too much composure. Where are you putting the anger, Michael? I considered her question seriously. Into planning, I suppose. Into ensuring I'm not further victimized. That's productive channeling, she acknowledged. But suppressed emotion eventually surfaces, sometimes destructively. We need to create space for you to process these feelings without them controlling your decisions or damaging your health. Under her guidance, I developed practices for emotional release that didn't interfere with my strategic thinking, intensive physical workouts that exhausted my body, journaling sessions where I expressed unfiltered rage and hurt, weekly hikes in nature where I sometimes shouted my anger into uninhabited canyons. These releases prevented emotional buildup while keeping my interactions with Elaine measured and controlled. Meanwhile, I monitored the continuing relationship between Elaine and Thomas through periodic updates from Reeves. Their meetings had become more cautious, quicker encounters in less public settings, but hadn't ceased despite Elaine's claims of ending the affair. Screenshots of their text exchanges revealed Thomas's impatience with their situation. "When are you going to tell him you want out?" he'd written. "We've wasted enough time with this reconciliation charade." Elaine's response was revealing. "Not yet. If I leave now, the settlement will be minimal. I need to convince him we're genuinely trying, then have it not work out despite our best efforts. Trust me on the timing." Reading these exchanges hardened my resolve. This wasn't just betrayal but calculated exploitation, a conspiracy to manipulate both my emotions and finances. My commitment to ensuring appropriate consequences solidified. During this period, I made an interesting discovery while reviewing our household expenses. Several significant charges on our joint credit card corresponded exactly with dates Elaine and Thomas had met at hotels or restaurants. She had been funding aspects of their affair with our shared resources, a clear case of financial infidelity. That, Catherine assured me, would strengthen our position. "Document everything," she advised. "Every charge, every corresponding meeting. This pattern establishes intent to misuse marital assets." By the sixth week after my confrontation with Elaine, I had compiled a comprehensive file documenting 8 months of regular hotel stays charged to our joint credit card expensive dinners coinciding with their rendezvous gifts purchased for Thomas using our shared Amazon account cash withdrawals from our joint account on days preceding their meetings, evidence of company resources being diverted to develop their side business text, and email exchanges discussing how to maximize her divorce settlement most valuably. I had documented her deliberate deception during our reconciliation period, claiming to end the affair while continuing it, attending marriage counseling while planning her exit, and discussing with Thomas how to manipulate me into a generous settlement by appearing remorseful. "You've built an unusually strong case," Catherine noted during our final strategy session. "Now we need to determine timing and approach." Together, we developed a multi-phase plan that would protect my interests while allowing consequences to unfold naturally from Elaine and Thomas's own actions. The plan wasn't about vengeance, but justice, ensuring that deception and exploitation didn't yield the rewards they anticipated. "I suggest you keep playing the considerate, processing husband for a bit longer," Catherine advised. "We're almost ready to execute, but a few more pieces would strengthen our position considerably." I agreed, continuing my performance as the wounded but potentially forgiving spouse. I even suggested a weekend getaway to reconnect and rebuild trust, a trip Elaine enthusiastically endorsed, apparently believing it signaled my movement toward reconciliation. In reality, the weekend provided an opportunity for Reeves to thoroughly document evidence of financial misconduct in our home office while we were away. The final preparation involved securing my business interests. Although Callahan Business Solutions had been established during our marriage, making it technically community property, I had documentation showing it was funded entirely through my separate inheritance from my grandmother rather than marital assets. Additionally, Elaine had signed a post-nuptial agreement related specifically to the business during our 7th year of marriage, acknowledging she had no claim to its value in exchange for other financial considerations at that time. This significantly limits her claim on your most valuable asset, Catherine confirmed after reviewing the documentation. The postnuptial was properly executed with independent counsel for both parties. It should withstand challenge. With legal, financial, and evidentiary preparations complete, I was ready to implement the multi-phase strategy we had developed, a carefully orchestrated sequence that would ensure appropriate consequences while maintaining my ethical standards. This wasn't about destroying Elaine, but about ensuring justice and protecting my future. Phase 1 of our strategy addressed the professional misconduct. After careful consideration of timing, I arranged a confidential meeting with Victor Hargrove, CEO of Wilson & Marks, the agency where both Elaine and Thomas worked. This wasn't an impulsive act of revenge, but a calculated decision based on evidence of serious ethical violations that potentially jeopardized the agency's client relationships and reputation. That I requested the meeting through formal channels, presenting myself as Michael Callahan, CEO of Callahan Business Solutions, rather than emphasizing my connection to Elaine. This professional approach ensured I would be taken seriously rather than dismissed as a vengeful spouse. Hargrove's assistant scheduled a 30-minute slot on a Tuesday morning. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in my best suit, carrying a leather portfolio containing carefully selected documentation. The agency's offices occupied 3 floors of a sleek downtown building, modern, open-concept spaces showcasing award-winning campaigns and client testimonials. I had visited occasionally for holiday parties and agency events, but now saw the environment through different eyes, wondering how many colleagues had observed Elaine and Thomas's inappropriate relationship developing. Victor Hargrove was a formidable presence, 6'3" with the build of the college basketball player he'd once been, now in his late 50s with a reputation for building the agency from a local operation to a regional powerhouse. He greeted me with a firm handshake and appropriate professional warmth, clearly assuming this meeting related to potential business collaboration. "Michael Callahan," he said, gesturing toward comfortable chairs in his corner office. "Elaine speaks highly of your consulting work. Are you exploring agency partnerships for some of your clients?" "I'm here on a different matter," I responded, maintaining composure. "One that's difficult but necessary to address." His expression shifted to cautious neutrality. I'm listening. I've discovered information that significantly impacts your agency. I began, opening my portfolio. I'm approaching you not as Elaine's husband, but as a business professional who understands the importance of ethical conduct and fiduciary responsibility. Over the next 20 minutes, I presented selected evidence of how Elaine and Thomas had misused company resources, approached current clients about potentially following them to their planned new venture, and used agency facilities and working hours to develop competing business infrastructure. I was methodical, unemotional, and focused solely on the professional misconduct rather than personal betrayal. I have no interest in creating scandal or public embarrassment, I emphasized. My goal is ensuring you have accurate information about activities that potentially threaten your business interests and client relationships. Hargrove's expression remained carefully neutral, though I noticed his jaw tightening as he reviewed email screenshots showing Thomas and Elaine discussing which clients might be poachable when they eventually left the agency. May I ask why? You're bringing this to my attention? He asked finally. This isn't the typical approach of a spouse who's discovered infidelity. Because ethical conduct matters in business, I replied honestly. What they've done violates professional standards. We both value. Their personal choices are their own, but misappropriating company resources and undermining client relationships crosses into territory that has broader implications. He nodded slowly, continuing to examine the documentation. How much of this relates to their personal relationship versus professional misconduct? I've only shared evidence of professional ethical violations, I clarified. Their personal relationship is irrelevant to this discussion except where company resources were misused to facilitate it during working hours. After asking several clarifying questions about specific documents, Hargrove leaned back in his chair, studying me with new assessment. I appreciate the professional way you've approached this, he said finally. Most people in your position would have handled things very differently. I believe in addressing issues at appropriate levels, I responded. Personal matters should be handled personally. Professional misconduct has professional channels for resolution. As our meeting concluded, Hargrove assured me the agency would conduct a thorough internal investigation. We take ethics violations extremely seriously, he stated. Client trust is our most valuable asset. I thanked him for his time, emphasizing again that I had no interest in public exposure or embarrassment, just appropriate professional accountability. As I left his office, I felt no triumph or vindication, only the solemn satisfaction of having addressed a legitimate wrong through proper channels. The agency's investigation proceeded with impressive efficiency and discretion. Through professional contacts, I learned that Hargrove had assembled a small team from legal, HR, and IT to review email records, expense reports, and client communication. Within 10 days, both Elaine and Thomas were called to separate meetings with this team. Confronted with evidence of their misconduct, I wasn't privy to those conversations, but the outcomes became clear when Elaine arrived home that evening. Visibly shaken, she poured herself a generous glass of wine before joining me in the living room where I was reviewing client proposals. I've been suspended pending investigation, she announced, voice trembling with shock and anger. There, claiming Thomas and I violated ethics policies and misused company resources. She studied my face carefully. Did you do this? I met her gaze steadily. Did you violate ethics policies and misuse company resources? That's not. She began, then stopped herself. After a long pause, she asked quietly, how did you know? The same way I knew about the hotel in Napa. I replied evenly. I gathered information to understand what I was dealing with. Her expression hardened. So this is your revenge? Destroying my career? I merely presented factual information about professional misconduct to the appropriate authority. I countered. Any consequences result from your actions, not my reporting of them. She launched into a defensive tirade about how everyone used company resources occasionally for personal matters, how their plans hadn't actually damaged the agency, how I'd overreacted to standard industry practices. When these justifications failed to elicit the guilty response she sought, she shifted to wounded accusations. I made one mistake, she insisted, tears replacing anger. One relationship misstep, and you're systematically destroying everything I've built. Your one mistake involved 8 months of deception, financial exploitation, and professional ethical violations. I responded calmly. And according to your text with Thomas, you were planning to leave me once you'd extracted maximum financial benefit. Those aren't missteps, Elaine. They're calculated decisions with natural consequences. She stared at me with new awareness, perhaps finally recognizing that her perception of me as conflict avoidant and easily manipulated had been dangerously inaccurate. Without another word, she retreated to the guest bedroom, where she spent hours on her phone, presumably updating Thomas and seeking legal advice. The following morning, she left early without speaking to me. 3 days later, she and Thomas were formally terminated for ethical violations following the completion of the agency's investigation. Through industry connections, I learned that the findings included unauthorized use of proprietary client information, misappropriation of company resources, and documented attempts to solicit agency clients for their planned competing business. This outcome wasn't just punitive but protective, preventing them from executing their plan to leave with poached clients and misappropriated materials. The formal termination for cause also triggered clauses in their employment contracts that nullified severance packages and accelerated repayment of education benefits the agency had provided for Elaine's executive MBA program the previous year. Phase 2 of our strategy addressed Thomas's vulnerable position with his ex-wife. This wasn't vengeful interference, but appropriate disclosure of information that legitimately impacted existing legal agreements. Through careful research, I had discovered that Thomas's divorce settlement included a morality clause related to his visitation rights with his children, a common provision in contentious divorces where character concerns exist. The clause specifically prohibited him from exposing the children to romantic partners who hadn't been formally introduced to his ex-wife or involving the children in deceptive relationships. Thomas had apparently brought his children to dinner with Elaine on several occasions, introducing her as his colleague while they were actively engaged in their affair, and had included the children in weekend trips where he and Elaine shared accommodations. Rather than directly contacting his ex-wife, I consulted with Catherine about ethical disclosure options. She suggested a formal letter to Thomas's attorney, copying his ex-wife's attorney of record, stating factually that information had come to light that potentially impacted the morality clause in their custody agreement. The letter included only documentation directly relevant to the children's involvement, nothing about the broader affair or our marital situation. This puts the information in appropriate legal channels without appearing vindictive, Catherine explained. The attorneys will handle it according to established processes. The impact was significant but proportional to the violation. Thomas's ex-wife filed for modification of their custody arrangement based on the documented breaches of the morality clause. Court records indicated the judge ordered a temporary suspension of overnight visitation pending a full hearing, and Thomas was required to attend co-parenting counseling sessions to address trust and communication issues. More importantly for my situation, his ex-wife's attorney filed to enforce financial penalties specified in their divorce agreement for violations of the morality clause, creating additional financial pressure at precisely the time Thomas had lost his primary income source. These first 2 phases unfolded over approximately 3 weeks, during which Elaine's demeanor toward me transformed from manipulative reconciliation attempts to cold anger to desperate negotiation. She alternated between threats of destroying me in court and pleading for reasonable discussion about our future. Throughout these emotional swings, I maintained measured composure, responding factually to accusations and declining to engage in recriminations. Phase 3 addressed our social circle, not through malicious gossip, but through selective, factual disclosure to those closest to us. This was perhaps the most personally challenging phase, as it required balancing honest communication with appropriate discretion. That I began with Caroline and David Maxwell, inviting them to dinner at a neutral restaurant rather than either of our homes. After initial catching-up conversation, I addressed the elephant in the room. I'm sure you've both been wondering about the situation between Elaine and me. I began, meeting Caroline's sympathetic gaze. I wanted you to hear directly from me. What's happening? I shared a condensed, factual account of discovering the affair, Elaine's termination for ethical violations, and our current separate but shared household status, while legal details were addressed. I emphasized that while reconciliation seemed unlikely given the extent of deception involved, I bore no ill will toward friends who maintained relationships with both of us. This isn't about choosing sides, I assured them, just providing context for changes you'll inevitably notice. Caroline reached across the table to squeeze my hand. We've suspected something was seriously wrong, she admitted. The way Elaine's been canceling plans last minute, the tension when we did get together. I've been worried about you. David nodded agreement. Nothing about this situation is easy, but we appreciate your straightforwardness. How can we support you through this? Their genuine concern was both validating and emotional. The first time I'd allowed myself to experience the comfort of friendship amid the strategic maneuvering of recent weeks. We spent the remainder of dinner discussing practical matters. Their offering to help with household tasks I might be neglecting, suggestions for my self-care during the stress, recommendations for activities to fill suddenly empty weekends. We parted. Caroline hugged me tightly. You're handling this with remarkable grace, she whispered. But don't forget to let yourself feel it too. Similar conversations followed with other close friends, always in private settings, always with emphasis on facts rather than accusations. I never initiated discussions about Elaine's affair, but answered honestly when asked directly. I didn't share intimate details or attempt to influence others' opinions. Simply acknowledged the reality of our situation when appropriate. The neighborhood barbecue referenced in the original account was actually an annual summer gathering I traditionally hosted. After consultation with Catherine about potential implications, I decided to maintain this tradition rather than canceling or creating conspicuous absence. I invited our usual guests, including neighbors, business associates, and mutual friends, deliberately creating normalcy amid significant change. The event proceeded remarkably smoothly until Benjamin Wells, our neighbor 3 houses down who'd had perhaps one too many beers, loudly asked where Elaine was. As she'd usually co-hosted these gatherings, the momentary hush fell over the nearby conversations. Rather than deflecting or creating a convenient fiction, I responded with simple honesty. Elaine and I are currently separating, I stated calmly. We're working through some challenges related to infidelity and trust issues. I didn't elaborate further, immediately offering to refresh Benjamin's drink and steering conversation toward his recent fishing trip. Nevertheless, the brief exchange had been overheard by several guests, and through the natural network of social connections, accurate information spread without need for my elaboration. By the following day, most of our social circle was aware of the basic situation. Many reached out with messages of support and offers of assistance. Some admitted they'd suspected problems based on Elaine's recent behavior changes. A few expressed shock and disbelief, particularly those who knew us primarily as a couple rather than as individuals. The impact on Elaine's social standing was substantial, but resulted from factual information rather than character assassination. Friends who reached out to her reported receiving dramatically different versions of events. Initially claims that I was controlling and overreacting to a harmless flirtation. Later accusations that I had ambushed her professionally out of vengeful spite. And eventually tearful admissions that things had gotten complicated and she'd made some mistakes. These inconsistent narratives, contrasted with my consistent, factual account, naturally influenced how our social circle responded to the situation. I never asked anyone to choose sides or cut contact with Elaine, yet many did so organically, based on their own assessment of the situation. Throughout these 3 phases, I maintained emotional equilibrium through continued therapy with Dr. Chun, regular exercise, and focused attention on my business, which had become something of a sanctuary amid personal turmoil. I also reconnected with old friends and interests that had diminished during my marriage, taking weekend hiking trips with a college roommate, rejoining a chess club I'd abandoned due to Elaine's disinterest, and volunteering at a business incubator. Mentoring young entrepreneurs. These activities weren't distractions, but investments in rebuilding a life independent of my failed marriage. They provided not only emotional support, but practical demonstration that I was moving forward rather than being defined by betrayal, a fact that would prove significant in the legal proceedings to come. When I finally filed for divorce, the timing was strategically optimal. Elaine was in a substantially weakened position, unemployed for professional misconduct rather than market conditions, socially isolated due to her own inconsistent narratives, and abandoned by Thomas, who had retreated to focus on his own legal and financial challenges with his ex-wife. Catherine Winters prepared the filing with characteristic thoroughness, including comprehensive documentation of financial misconduct, alongside standard dissolution paperwork. We opted for a straightforward approach, seeking equitable division of legitimate marital assets, while highlighting specific instances where separate treatment was warranted due to documented misuse of shared resources. Elaine's initial response was predictably aggressive. She retained Brandon Mitchell, a divorce attorney known for combative tactics and media-friendly posturing. Their opening position demanded 65% of all assets, substantial spousal support, and partial ownership interest in my business, despite the post-nuptial agreement explicitly excluding it. This is standard opening strategy, Catherine explained, unperturbed by their demands. They're hoping to intimidate you into a quick settlement before the court examines the financial misconduct evidence. Mitchell specializes in creating enough noise and stress that the other party settles just to end the process. She proved correct. Mitchell scheduled unnecessary depositions, filed motions for temporary support at maximum possible levels, and attempted to characterize me as financially controlling while portraying Elaine as a victim of both workplace discrimination and marital power imbalance. Catherine methodically countered each maneuver, responding with focused evidence rather than emotional arguments. When Mitchell claimed Elaine needed emergency support due to her unemployment, Catherine presented documentation that her termination resulted from ethical violations rather than my interference. When he argued she deserved compensation for supporting my business growth, Catherine submitted the properly executed post-nuptial agreement alongside evidence that Elaine had received substantial benefits at the time of signing. Most effectively, Catherine presented the court with comprehensive evidence of how Elaine had used marital assets to finance her affair and support Thomas's competing business venture, complete with spreadsheets correlating credit card charges with hotel stays, receipts for gifts purchased with joint funds, and text messages discussing how to maximize financial extraction before leaving the marriage. 3 months into proceedings, Judge Eleanor Ramirez, a family court veteran with 22 years on the bench, called attorneys for both sides into chambers. Though I wasn't present for this discussion, Catherine later reported that Judge Ramirez had expressed frustration with Mitchell's tactics and suggested he counsel his client on the strength of our evidence regarding financial misconduct. The judge essentially told him to stop wasting court resources on unreasonable positions when the documentation clearly supports claims of financial infidelity, Catherine explained. She specifically mentioned that continued unreasonable demands might result in attorney fee awards against his client. This judicial intervention proved pivotal. Within days, Mitchell contacted Catherine proposing settlement discussions. Their initial offer remained unreasonable but had moderated significantly from their opening position. Over the next several weeks, through methodical negotiation and strategic concessions on minor points to secure major objectives, we moved toward resolution. The final settlement conference occurred 6 months after filing, relatively quick by contentious divorce standards. Elaine attended with Mitchell while Catherine represented me. Judge Ramirez reviewed the proposed agreement with careful attention, asking clarifying questions about specific provisions before addressing Elaine directly. Mrs. Callahan, do you understand that this agreement provides substantially less than standard community property division would typically allocate? She asked. Elaine nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. And you accept these terms knowingly and voluntarily, understanding they reflect consequences of documented financial misconduct during your marriage? Mitchell attempted to interject about disputed characterizations, but Judge Ramirez silenced him with a raised hand. Counsel, I've reviewed the evidence. The documentation is quite clear. Elaine's response was barely audible. Yes, I understand. The judge turned to me with equal directness. Mr. Callahan, while the evidence supports the disproportionate division proposed, I need to confirm you're entering this agreement without vindictive intent. The law allows consequences for financial misconduct, but does not support punitive settlements. I met her gaze respectfully. Your Honor, I've sought equitable resolution considering all factors, including documented misuse of marital assets. My goal has been appropriate accountability, not punishment. Judge Ramirez nodded, then signed the final judgment incorporating our settlement agreement. The terms included our primary residence awarded to me, with Elaine receiving a negotiated cash payment representing approximately 25% of the equity rather than the standard 50% retirement accounts divided 75/25 in my favor, reflecting documented evidence that Elaine had secretly withdrawn funds to support her relationship with Thomas. My business recognized as separate property per the valid post-nuptial agreement. Minimal, time-limited spousal support considerably below standard guidelines. Acknowledging that Elaine's unemployment resulted from her own professional misconduct rather than market conditions, each party responsible for their own legal fees. A significant concession considering Elaine's limited resources, but one that prevented potential appeals. As the judgment was read into record, I observed Elaine's expression, a complex mixture of resignation, resentment, and perhaps, fleetingly, recognition of consequences appropriately aligned with choices. There was no satisfaction in witnessing her diminishment, only solemn acknowledgement that justice had been served through proper legal channels. After final documents were signed, Catherine shook my hand with professional satisfaction. Well executed. From start to finish, she commented quietly. You maintained dignity throughout while ensuring appropriate accountability. Not many clients manage that balance. As we left the courthouse, I noticed Elaine standing alone near the entrance, Mitchell having already departed for another appointment. Our eyes met briefly across the marble lobby. I nodded once, not in triumph, but in final acknowledgement, before continuing toward the future I would now build alone. It's been 2 years since the divorce was finalized. The immediate aftermath brought practical challenges alongside emotional processing. The 5-bedroom craftsman that had once represented our shared success now felt cavernous and haunted by memories. After 3 months of rattling around rooms filled with remnants of my former life, I made the decision to sell. The real estate market had strengthened since our purchase, resulting in substantial equity despite the recent recession. I used a portion of the proceeds to purchase a modern, 3-bedroom home overlooking Folsom Lake, something I'd always wanted but Elaine had dismissed as too remote and impractical for entertaining. The floor-to-ceiling windows framing the water view provided both literal and metaphorical perspective as I established my new normal. Professionally, Callahan Business Solutions not only survived the personal turmoil, but thrived. The disciplined compartmentalization that had protected my business during divorce proceedings evolved into renewed focus and innovation. We expanded services to include digital transformation consulting, grew to 15 full-time employees, and opened a satellite office in Seattle to better serve our Pacific Northwest clients. Perhaps most surprisingly, my professional reputation actually strengthened through the ordeal. Clients and colleagues who knew of the situation respected how I had handled myself throughout, maintaining service excellence despite personal challenges, addressing difficult circumstances with integrity rather than public drama, and emerging focused on future opportunities rather than past grievances. Several business associates became personal friends during this period, particularly Jason Lamott, the Chamber of Commerce connection I'd initially mentioned to Elaine as cover for. Meeting the private investigator. When I eventually shared the truth with him over drinks months after the divorce, he laughed appreciatively at the strategy before turning serious. You know what impressed me most about how you handled everything, he commented, swirling his bourbon thoughtfully. You never badmouthed her to anyone in our professional circle. Even now, you're stating facts without character assassination. That's uncommon restraint. This observation highlighted an important principle I'd maintained throughout, distinguishing between natural consequences and vindictive punishment. I had ensured appropriate accountability for specific actions rather than launching generalized attacks on Elaine's character or worth. This distinction had preserved my integrity while achieving necessary justice. My therapy sessions with Dr. Chun continued for 18 months post-divorce, transitioning from crisis management to deeper exploration of relationship patterns and future possibilities. Her insight proved invaluable as I considered dating again. The greatest risk now isn't being deceived again, she observed during one of our final sessions. It's allowing past betrayal to prevent authentic connection. Caution is appropriate, but fortresses don't facilitate intimacy. I reconnected with old friends whose relationships had diminished during my marriage, my college roommate Richard, who had moved to Boulder, Colorado, my former mentor Professor Williams, who had retired to Carmel, cousins in Seattle I'd seen only at occasional family gatherings. These renewed connections provided not only emotional support, but expanded perspective beyond Sacramento's social circles where my divorce remained occasional conversation fodder, that I also cultivated new friendships through interests Elaine had never shared, joining a local sailing club that utilized Folsom Lake, participating in a monthly philosophy discussion group hosted by Sacramento State, volunteering as a business mentor at a veterans entrepreneurship program. These activities connected me with people who knew me only as I was now, not as half of a failed marriage. As for Elaine and Thomas, their respective trajectories followed predictable paths given their choices. Their relationship didn't survive the dual implosion of their careers and social standing. According to mutual acquaintances who maintained contact with Elaine, Thomas had initially moved into her rented apartment after both lost their jobs. Financial pressures, his ongoing legal battles with his ex-wife, and the collapse of their planned business venture created unsustainable stress. 3 months after our divorce finalized, Thomas relocated to Portland, apparently through connections from his previous marriage. Elaine, unable to secure comparable employment in Sacramento due to her professional reputation damage, eventually moved back to her hometown in Cleveland, Ohio. Caroline, who maintained occasional contact out of long-standing friendship, reported that Elaine had secured an entry-level marketing position at a local manufacturing company, a significant step down from her director-level role, but offering potential for advancement that I neither celebrated nor lamented these outcomes. They represented natural consequences of choices rather than orchestrated punishment. I wished her neither suffering nor particular success, simply appropriate life lessons and eventual peace from the emotional distance that healthy detachment provides. My own journey toward new relationship possibilities proceeded cautiously but deliberately. 14 months after the divorce, I created profiles on several reputable dating platforms, approaching the process with thoughtful intentionality rather than emotional reactivity. I established clear boundaries, no rushing physical intimacy, transparent communication about past experiences without dwelling on them, and careful attention to consistency between words and actions. Several promising connections failed to develop beyond a few dates, some due to fundamental compatibility issues, others because my cautious pace didn't match their expectations. I recognized these as necessary filtering experiences rather than failures, each clarifying my understanding of both my own needs and healthy relationship dynamics. 6 months ago, I met Alexandra Chun, unrelated to my therapist despite the shared surname, at a medical fundraiser hosted by the Chamber of Commerce. A pediatric oncologist at UC Davis Medical Center, she impressed me immediately with her combination of professional intensity and personal warmth. Our conversation that evening ranged from healthcare policy to favorite hiking trails, flowing with an ease that felt both novel and familiar. Our relationship has developed thoughtfully, weekly dates becoming twice weekly, then occasional weekends, shared activities introducing each other to our respective worlds. She understands my caution without taking it personally, sharing her own history of a brief, failed marriage in medical school that taught valuable lessons about partnership compatibility. Alexandra is fundamentally different from Elaine, more grounded, less concerned with social status, genuine in both joy and occasional frustration. Where Elaine cultivated a carefully curated public persona, Alexandra presents consistent authenticity across contexts. When I meet her colleagues or friends, they describe the same person I know, no compartmentalized versions or strategic self-presentation. Trust develops slowly for me now, built on observed patterns rather than assumed loyalty. I notice how Alexandra's words align with actions, how she manages disagreements with directness rather than manipulation, how her ambition focuses on patient outcomes rather than professional status. Each consistent interaction lays another brick in the foundation of potential partnership that we're taking things slowly, maintaining separate residences while building interconnected lives. I've introduced her to Caroline and David, who approved with obvious relief at seeing me engaged in healthy connection. She's integrated me into gatherings with her close-knit circle of medical colleagues who have become informal family during her demanding career. The most important lesson I've learned through this entire journey is that true revenge was never about hurting Elaine. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring justice through appropriate channels. I never broke a single law or told a single lie. I simply ensured that truth came to light through proper processes, allowing natural consequences to follow their course. This approach preserved not only my legal position, but my integrity and future capacity for trusting connection. Had I pursued vindictive punishment or engaged in retaliatory deception, I would have compromised the very principles I sought to defend, potentially becoming a distorted reflection of the betrayal I experienced. Instead, I maintained ethical boundaries while ensuring accountability, a balanced response that honored both justice and personal integrity. This foundation has enabled genuine healing rather than persistent bitterness, creating space for the measured optimism with which I now approach life's possibilities. As I sit on my deck overlooking the lake this evening, watching sunset colors reflect across the water, I recognize that while betrayal irreparably altered my life trajectory, it didn't determine my destination. That remains mine to choose, informed by experience but not defined by it, cautious but increasingly open to authentic connection. Sometimes, living well truly is the best revenge, not as performance for others' benefit or comparative scorecard against former partners, but as personal reclamation of joy, purpose, and possibility. The price of betrayal was substantial, but the return on rebuilding has proven even more valuable. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.